most of the students feels that this standard is very heavy, lengthy and difficult, but actually this standard is not difficult despite of the fact it is a lengthy standard. Okay, so once you see that overview, definitely you will get good amount of confidence. I am very sure with that. Okay, let's start. Firstly, we should start with the scope of the standard. Then only we can understand what comes under the purview of the standard and what are scoped out of the standard. After that, we should identify whether a contract is a lease or contract contains a lease. In order to identify that, we should definitely know the meaning of lease, definition of lease. Otherwise, we cannot establish that. Okay, so once we identify that a contract is a lease or contract contains a lease, our next step is we can directly move to accounting part. As we already know, there are two parties in lease transaction. One is lessor and another one is lessee. Firstly, we see the topics from lessee perspective. Okay, in the books of lessee, classification of lease doesn't matter. Classification of lease doesn't matter in the books of lessee. Regardless whether it is a operating lease or finance lease, there is only one type of accounting. What is that? Simply you recognize ROU asset and lease liability on initial recognition. At what amount this initial recognition can be done, that constitute a substantial part of our discussion. And after this initial recognition, at what amount these accounts can be carried subsequently, that is subsequent measurement. If there is a changes in lease payments, how can we do remeasurement? If there is a lease modification, how can we account that? If multiple assets obtained on lease in a single contract, how to deal with that? If multiple contracts entered, when we can combine that contracts and when we cannot combine that contracts, that also we will discuss. If a contract contains both lease component and non-lease component, how to deal with that? And how to account sale and leaseback transactions and subleases. And there are two recognition exemptions also. Recognition exemption means what? Lessee can choose not to apply the requirements of the standard to these leases. What they are? One is short-term lease and another one is leases of low value asset. And this presentation and disclosure is as usual. Right? Now coming to lessor. Here classification of lease definitely matters because accounting is completely depends upon whether it is a operating lease or finance lease. In case of operating lease, that accounting is different. In case of finance lease, that accounting is also different, right? So in case of operating lease, we can complete that entire discussion in 5 minutes. But what about finance lease? Standard is saying that on initial recognition, you recognize lease receivables and de-recognize asset under the lease. At what amount these lease receivables can be recognized, that also constitute a substantial part of the discussion. And after such initial recognition, at what amount these lease receivables can be carried subsequently, and that is subsequent measurement. And when there is a lease modification, how to do the accounting. And there is one special case. If the lessor is a manufacturer or dealer, how to do the accounting. In addition to all these topics, here presentation disclosure is routine one. Okay, and there is one more topic. What is that? Transitional provisions. Though it is not important for your exams, still we try to cover in our session if time permits. Okay.